and then the second explosion.
And I'm not prepared for anything.
Echoes call from hollow halls, a voice that creeps and softly crawls. Time stands still, the air is
April 16th, 2014. Over 400 students boarded the MV Sewell after a long week of exams, ready to relax. But what began as fun ended in disaster. Screams filled the decks, chaos erupted, everyone fighting for their lives until it was too late. But the disaster didn't end there. From massive building collapse, to raging tower fires, to planes crashing from the sky. These are 6 real shocking disaster videos caught on camera, each one more horrific than the last. On the morning of February 4th, 2015, Flight GE2035 of TransAsia Airways lifted off from Taipei's Songshan Airport, bound for Kinmen Island. What should have been a short, routine hop turned into a nightmare within minutes. The aircraft was a new ATR 72-600, barely a year old, with 58 souls on board, passengers and crew alike. At approximately 10:45 in the morning, local time, the aircraft was pushed back and began taxiing toward runway 10. The flight crew included the captain in command, with nearly 5,000 flight hours, though only about 250 on this particular aircraft type, and alongside him an experienced fellow pilot and a senior observer. As the plane taxied, the pilot monitoring talked at length to the observer pilot about differences between the ATR 72-600 and older models. Although meant as a lesson, this conversation occurred during taxi, when the sterile cockpit rule should have limited non-essential talk. That distraction may have diminished the crew's focus during the crucial moments ahead. At 10:51, the ATR began its takeoff roll. Just 4 seconds into that roll, the pilot monitoring said aloud, "The ATCs is not armed." The pilot flying replied, "Really? Yeah, takeoff inhibit," but he did not abort. He said, "Continue takeoff." The automatic takeoff power control system, or ATPCS, was not ready. On this aircraft type, the rule was clear. If the ATPCS is not armed, the takeoff must be rejected. Yet departure continued. Moments later, the landing gear retracted, the autopilot engaged, and the aircraft started its right turn, climb toward 5,000 feet. At around 1,200 feet, the cockpit records show the master warning sounded, and on the display, the message "Engine 2 flameout" appeared. But the crew did not clearly announce or act on that emergency, according to standard procedures. Instead, confusion set in. Shortly afterward, the autopilot disengaged. Investigators believe it did so automatically, not verbally announced in the cockpit. The pilot flying took manual control, with little time, inadequate coordination, and growing alarms. The crew struggled to diagnose what was happening. Then, the fateful error. They reduced power on engine 1, the one still working, and eventually shut it down, thinking it was the failed unit. The voice recorder captured, "Wow," pulled back the wrong side throttle. And then, on the radio came the call, "Mayday, mayday, engine flameout." That distress call echoed just seconds before the aircraft's fate was sealed. With both engines effectively dead, the ATR banked sharply to the left, descending rapidly at low altitude. Witnesses on the ground captured the scene. The left wing clipped a taxi traveling on the Huandong Viaduct, the tip striking the pavement and sending the driver to hospital. The aircraft's final path took it inverted into the Keelung River, roughly 5 nautical miles from the runway end. On the riverbank, one rescuer remembered, "We saw a plane floating in the river. I swiftly swam to the plane with a life jacket and a rope. When I heard people calling for rescue, some were beating against the window calling for help. I couldn't see the first 6 rows of seats in the plane. The head of the plane was submerged in the water, and it seemed like it was lodged in the... It looked like a car accident. Passengers still had their belts on. The aircraft broke into multiple sections on impact. 43 people died. 4 crew members and 39 passengers. 13 passengers and 1 cabin crew member survived with serious injuries. Another passenger had minor harm. On the ground, the taxi driver and his passenger had minor injuries. The official investigation by Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council concluded the crash was caused by a series of errors layered onto a mechanical fault. The engine 2 auto feathering unit malfunctioned due to defective soldering joints. That triggered the ATPCS sequence and led to the uncommanded feathering of engine 2's propeller. With engine 2 out, the crew incorrectly shut down engine 1. The lack of standard callouts, chaotic cockpit environment, and failure to recognize thrust loss on engine 2 were all cited. In short, a stall-induced loss of control at low altitude created in a matter of seconds. Investigators also pointed to deeper issues in crew training and oversight. The captain had previously failed his simulator test for engine failure takeoff scenarios, yet the airline had not fully addressed the recurring deficiencies. Though remedial training had been offered, there was no systematic review program for pilot performance. What happened in those 3.5 minutes after takeoff changed lives forever. A mechanical glitch, a human mistake, and the relentless physics of flight. As the ATR struggled, stall warnings echoed in the cockpit. The aircraft's indicated airspeed dropped perilously close to stall threshold. The bank steepened, and altitude was lost. From the taxiway to the river in such short order, it shows how little margin for error exists in aviation. On the river shore, rescue teams battled strong currents, low visibility, silt and fast-moving water. Divers cut seat belts to extract bodies. The wreckage lay partially submerged, the tail section underwater, and the fuselage broken. The scene surreal. For the survivors, 15 on board, escape came down to sheer luck, location in the aircraft, and immediate rescue. The families left behind were confronted with emptiness nobody should face. For the culture of aviation safety, the accident became a stark reminder: when training, communication, mechanical reliability, and human factors all align poorly, disaster becomes tragically predictable. The tale of Flight G2035 serves as both tragedy and warning. A short flight, minutes to disaster, and consequences far beyond the time that passed. The voices captured in rescue footage, the urgent radio transmissions, the eyewitness accounts from the riverbank, these all testify to the raw human side behind the numbers. The screams for help, the sight of the plane, the hopeless glide into water. Before we go any further, I just want to ask you for a small favor. If you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We are pushing to hit 200,000 subscribers before the year ends. It feels impossible, but I know we can achieve it together because your support has been unreal. I know you'll subscribe, so without wasting more time, let's get back to the video. On the afternoon of March 28th, 2025, a sudden jolt tore through central Myanmar. The fault beneath the Earth's surface snapped. What had begun as a quiet, ordinary day turned into one of the worst moments in the country's recent history. The magnitude 7.7 quake struck near the city of Mandalay, along the vast Sagan Fault, a major crack in the earth where the tectonic plates slide past one another. In those first seconds, entire neighborhoods were torn apart. The ground cracked, homes collapsed, families were ripped from normal life and plunged into chaos. Survivors recall walls splitting open, tiles falling like rain, glass shattering. The tremors traveled far. Even in Bangkok, Thailand, rooftop pools spilled water straight onto the streets below. In Myanmar, the region of Sagang and Mandalay were hardest hit, infrastructure shattered. The historic Eva Bridge collapsed into the Irrawaddy River. Communications went dead. Power vanished. People found themselves trapped outside in the dust and rubble, without phone signals, without knowing if loved ones were safe. Authorities soon described the once hidden scale of the catastrophe. One survivor said simply, "We are still looking for our children, and we don't know if they are alive." Rescue teams raced against time, but the very ground beneath them had changed. A new study found that the fault slip extended over more than 400 kilometers, with the rupture traveling faster than the shear waves themselves, a rare super shear event. The numbers: maximum slip of 5 to 6 meters in places, Depth of rupture about 10 kilometers. In Mandalay suburbs, chaos was immediate. Buildings buckled. One witness said, "It was like the floor moved under our feet. Then, everything started falling. Schools and monasteries collapsed. Homes disappeared. Thousands of people were either killed or injured in an instant." The UN and the Red Cross called it the worst devastation in Asia in more than a century. In Thailand, more than 1,000 kilometers away, the shock waves hit too. A high-rise under construction in Bangkok collapsed. Workers lay trapped. On the streets, people fled their vehicles. One bystander captured the moment on his phone and said, "The tower was swaying like a tree in the wind. Then the floor just opened." Back in Myanmar, rescue operations faced monumental obstacles. Roads and bridges lay broken. The terrain racked. Communication networks offline. A fire department video showed rescuers pulling a man from under rubble more than 100 hours after the quake. Another eyewitness live on the scene captured the devastating moment in hopeful words. Casualty figures climbed by the day. Official numbers vary, but thousands were killed, many more injured, and thousands missing. One article reported at least 27,719 deaths, more than 4,500 injured, and 431 still missing. Homes, schools, hospitals, monasteries, all collapsed or damaged. One estimate said nearly 50,000 residential buildings, thousands of schools and hospitals, and the capital's new airport were badly damaged or destroyed. In the wreckage of a once quiet neighborhood, families sat by the rubble of their homes, clutching what little they still had. One woman turned to the camera and said, "I lost my house, my tomatoes, my daughter's toys. I just want my daughter to come back." In the dust and ruin, the human voice remained. It pleaded, it cried, it waited. Experts later looked at the fault behavior and found disturbing facts. The Sagang Fault, more than 1,400 kilometers long, had been locked, gathering strain for decades. The rupture in 2025 broke through a seismic gap, one that had been quiet for many years, releasing energy with remarkable violence. The fault's straight geometry, its previous quietness, made this rupture particularly destructive. As night fell, survivors camped outside under open skies. The aftershocks kept coming. Power generators hummed. Makeshift shelters formed. Children stared into smoky air. In one camp, a father said, "We cannot sleep. Every time the ground moves, we jump. My wife is asking if it will come again." In the capital of Nai Pyi and in smaller towns, the destroyed infrastructure made aid delivery almost impossible. Reports warned that large dams might be compromised. Bridges broken, supplies delayed. One official said, "The bridge that connects Mandalay to Sagang has collapsed. This will cause logistical issues." For the survivors who made it out of the collapsing homes and falling ceilings, there was no certainty. The missing, the trapped, the buried under concrete and wood. One rescue team member reported, "We heard children crying under the rubble. We found part of the roof collapsed on the classroom." In the hours and days that followed, the international community began to respond. Aid convoys, medical teams, blankets and tents arrived, but not fast enough. The scale of destruction was so vast, the remote regions so cut off, that many survivors said they felt abandoned. One resident said, "We feel forgotten. It is like the world moved on and left us here." But even in that darkness, there were stories of hope. A 5-year-old girl was pulled from the rubble of a collapsed monastery. After more than a day, rescuers had drilled a hole and whispered, "You're going to be okay." She answered quietly, "I am scared." They held her hand, lifted her out. The monk who posted the images said, "He saved her life by staying calm and just listening to her voice." In the end, the saga of this earthquake is one of nature's raw power meeting human fragility. A fault line deep beneath the earth triggered moments of terror that will linger for generations. Families lost everything, cities damaged beyond words. Yet in the wreckage, the human voice survived, the plea of a mother. The rescue team shouting for the trapped, the survivors sitting in tents at dusk, the ground still trembling. The question still remains long after the dust has settled. When the earth breaks, how do those above respond? How many homes must fall before we understand how to build them again? Till now, the people of central Myanmar continue to pick up the pieces. Their voices, their stories, their losses, and small victories are what remain. On the early morning of 8 April 2025, in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, the roof of the famed nightclub known as Jet Set gave way without warning. In the moments before midnight, a live merengue concert was underway inside. Hundreds of people filled the club. The building shook. The night changed forever. Inside the club, one moment, the lights, the music, the crowd were alive. The next moment came the collapse. A witness recounted, "It was sudden. I thought it was an earthquake. So I threw myself to the ground and covered my head." The voice of the saxophonist, the crash overhead, the roar of falling concrete. It happened in seconds. One young woman, just 17, searching for her father in the aftermath, said, "He was really important to me, and I'm not prepared for anything that isn't hugging him right now." She added, "I have been praying day and night." In the shadow of rubble she clung to hope. Hear her words directly.
It was really important to me, and I'm not prepared for anything that isn't hugging him right now. So I've been praying day and night.
Rescue crews pulled survivors from under the ruins, but by early morning officials announced that no one had been found alive since the roof collapsed. The government declared the search had entered a recovery phase. More than 200 people were confirmed dead, and hundreds more injured, with many yet unaccounted for. The club's rooftop collapsed around 12:44 a.m. while the performance was underway. Among the victims were beloved merengue star Ruby Perez, who had been on stage, and former Major League Baseball players Octavio Datel and Tony Blanco. A provincial governor, Nelsie Cruz, sister of baseball star Nelson Cruz, also perished, their names added to the national sorrow. Families gathered outside hospitals and the Forensic Institute, clutching photos and waiting for word. In one interview, a mother said, "No, I can't believe that. No, She fought for composure beside her son. "How can I feel?" she asked, tears in her voice. The family says they last heard from her on Monday night, around 9. The pain they felt, no doubt, was excruciating with every minute that passed. Her son, who spoke English, also had words to say.
On any hospitalized list, she hasn't appeared on any passed away list. My family has gone to the morgues in the Dominican Republic to identify unidentified bodies, and she's not any of the unidentified bodies in the morgue either.
The family visited morgues, hoping but fearing. The shock of the unknown was as heavy as the rubble itself. Rescue teams crawled through broken concrete slabs, metal beams, and thousands of pounds of debris. They used sniffer dogs, drills, saws. One official said they had heard some sounds and were working in several critical zones. But within 48 hours they shifted from rescue to recovery. They had exhausted all possibilities of finding survivors and would focus on retrieving bodies. Inside the wrecked building, investigators noted troubling signs. The roof was supported by narrow columns only on the sides and lacked support at the center. Hours before the collapse, new plasterboard had been installed and waterproofing done a month earlier. The owner later admitted renovations had been made. Engineers said the roof might have failed under its own weight, the heavy equipment, the crowd load. On the streets of Santo Domingo, the atmosphere turned from celebration to mourning. A national period of mourning was declared. Every flag lowered. The country in grief. Many foreigners were among the victims. The cultural shock reached across borders. People donated blood all over the city. The tragedy brought pause to life. One father, whose son attended the concert but did not return home, said quietly, "We're holding on only to God." Another woman, waiting for her goddaughter, said, "I'm waiting for her. She's in there. I know she's in there." In the chaos, hope clung to faith. As the bodies were pulled out, teams labored to identify them. Many were unrecognizable. More women than men remained unidentified, partly because men carried ID cards more often. The stench of death hung in the morgue area. One man said, "I don't have the stomach to find out the worst yet." The legal fallout began almost immediately. Families filed lawsuits accusing the club owners and government of negligence. Investigators moved in. The club's owner, Antonio Espaya, and his sister were later arrested for alleged involuntary manslaughter. The question echoed, what happened? Why did it happen? And who will answer for it? In the months ahead, the investigation would need to uncover whether building codes were followed, inspections done, risk managed. But for many families, the answers came too late. Their celebration of music and dancing became a nightmare of falling steel and shattered lives. A former guest described the sound, parts of the roof falling, and people starting to move away seconds before the entire roof collapses onto them. The terror of realization, the scramble, the voices under debris. One man recalled, we tried to get to the area where Ruby was, but there was too much debris there. In the hours that followed, international aid arrived. Puerto Rico, Israel, Mexico sent specialists, but the damage was full, and the buildings ruined deep. The scene looked like an earthquake had hit in the heart of the city. When the dust settled, the toll was staggering. Death count rising past 200, some reports near 230, hundreds injured, some critically, many lives permanently changed. One red hat and sunglasses, left on a chair where Ruby Perez once stood, became a symbol of loss. Amid the rubble, survivors asked, how did a night of joy turn into such devastation? Families asked, why weren't we warned? Officials asked, were standards ignored? And the people waited for justice. The crash did not occur through any violent act of wrongdoing in the traditional crime sense. Yet the collapse of safety, of systems, of oversight, created a scenario where loss of life multiplied. The voices of victims, the anguish of families, the long hours in the morgue, the pleadings in the dark, all formed a painful narrative of responsibility. The club remains closed, the dance floor silent. The memory of that night echoes in every rebuilt beam, every tribunal hearing, every family that sits empty of a loved one. Music stopped. Lives changed. On the morning of April 16, 2014, a routine school trip turned into a national tragedy. The ferry MV Sewell left port in Incheon, carrying 476 people, most of them second-year students from Danwon High School in Seoul. They were laughing, joking, and filming. One clip filmed inside the ship shows teenagers joking together. Then someone shouts, "It is leaning." Another asks, "Is this sinking for real?" A crew member's voice booms over a loudspeaker. He tells them to stay where you are. The teens continue to talk among themselves. One, wearing a life jacket, says, "It is like the Titanic." That line, meant as a joke, would later ring in every parent's ears like something else, something cruel and small against a huge loss. The Sewol made a sharp turn in the Mingle Channel. Cargo shifted. The ship heeled badly to starboard. Investigators later found the ferry had been altered, overloaded, and cargo had not been properly secured. The combination of those facts, and a dangerous turn, set the stage for disaster. Students who had been joking were now trapped as the ship listed more and more. The mobile phone videos became evidence and testimony at once. In one recording, a young voice, thinking of family, says in a raw, simple plea, "Please, if only I could live. Mom, Dad, I love you." Those words were recorded and later handed to media by the father of one of the victims. They cut straight through any report or number. As the ship turned and leaned, teachers and crew used the loudspeaker to instruct passengers, repeatedly telling them to remain inside and to wait for rescue. The decision to tell passengers to stay was the command that many followed. Some survivors later explained they followed orders because they trusted the crew. When the situation worsened, the passengers who trusted that order had few paths to safety. Outside, rescue boats were being mobilized, but only slowly. Currents in the channel were strong, the water cold, and the Sewol was losing stability fast. Relatives gathered on Jindo Island at a sports stadium as the hours stretched. They waited for news, for any sign of life. A father cried out in desperation and anger. One mother managed to grab a microphone and shouted in a voice stunned by grief, "Bring the captain here and then unalive him in the water and bring back our children." Those words expressed the raw fury of parents who felt betrayed, Their anger was not just directed at fate, it was directed at human choices that had made the tragedy possible. Reports later showed the captain and some crew were arrested on charges of negligence. South Korean media reported the captain had left the ship early. Families watched helplessly as people who should have led the evacuation were among the first to lead. Divers worked through the night. Rescue teams scrambled to cut through twisted metal, burst open doors, and reach cabins where children huddled. Some survivors were pulled out of the water. A tiny child named Kwan-gon woke up in a hospital bed after being rescued. She was 6 years old. Her parents had not been heard from. On the ship, the small pockets of life were like islands. One cabin with survivors. One passage filled with floating lights from mobile phones. One group of students holding hands. But the overall picture grew darker. 304 people were confirmed dead or still missing. More than 200 of them were students. The count left a country stunned. Why did the ferry sink? The formal answers were complex and technical, but the outline was clear. The sailwheel had been modified to carry more cargo and passengers than it was originally designed for. That modification reduced its stability. The cargo was not lashed properly. On the day of the disaster, an unsafe turn caused the unstable load to shift. When cargo shifts, a ship can heel suddenly and lose the reserve buoyancy that keeps it upright. The captain's decisions and the crew's orders then became decisive. In the crucial seconds when lives might have been saved, confusion and conflicting commands cost time and choices. That confusion appears in the recordings. Students filmed their last minutes with shaky hands and calm voices. Their footage shows teenagers sharing jokes, then asking whether the ship was sinking. Later recordings show the plea for family. Another film shows terrified children huddled in the sinking ship, wearing life jackets but otherwise helpless and waiting for rescuers that could not reach them. Parents later gave DNA samples at Jindo Stadium to try and identify the victims. The hospital morgues and temporary mortuaries filled with the unrecognizable. A father described the cruel ritual of visiting morgues to find his child. He said his daughter was not on any list. The small acts of identification and the tests became the only way some families could find closure. Public anger rose. Protesters confronted officials. The Yellow Ribbon movement spread across the country, a symbol for memory and for the demand that someone be held accountable. The Seoul shifted the public debate in South Korea. Questions about regulation, oversight, the enforcement of safety standards, and the corporate decisions that prioritized profit over safety dominated the national conversation. Investigations found that the company that operated the ship had engaged in cost-cutting and had not followed safety rules. Where oversight should have been enforced, it had been lax. The captain and several crew members were later convicted. Still, many families felt the justice did not match the loss of a generation of teenagers. In the months after the sinking, the wreck was raised from the seafloor. The salvage operation was complex and painful. The hull was pulled up, and the images of the ship lying on its side, on the dock, were broadcast over and over. For relatives, the sight of the hull returned the dead to a visible place. But it also confirmed horrors. Investigators found evidence of illegal modifications and poor loading practice. The final reports laid out a long chain of errors and failures rather than a single cause. Yet, the human voice remained the most powerful testimony. Small sounds from mobile phones. A child's whispered, "Mom, Dad, I love you." Parents screaming for accountability. A captain apologizing and saying he was sorry and deeply ashamed. And the thousands of later testimonies about empty desks and ruined classrooms. The footage that once seemed casual on a school trip became the key evidence of how ordinary people faced an extraordinary end. The Seoul sinking changed the lives of families, classmates, and a country. The images of empty school chairs and rows of taped-off shoes became a national symbol. Years later, the yellow ribbons still appear at memorials and at protests. The voices recorded on those phones still echo. The student who joked, "It is like the Titanic," did not know then that his words would be a memory that would haunt a nation. The plea, "Please, if only I could live. Mom, Dad, I love you," captured not only the last moments of an individual, but the human cost of choices made above and below decks. It was the evening of August 4th, 2020, when Beirut's skyline was split apart by one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in modern history. The sun was beginning to lower over the city, as people recorded what seemed to be a small fire rising from the port. Thick gray smoke curled upward. At first, many believed it was a warehouse blaze, something the firefighters would soon contain. Some even filmed the scene from their balconies, unaware that they were seconds away from the kind of blast that would change their lives forever. A man named Omar, a local shopkeeper, was inside his store near the waterfront. He remembers the first sound, a dull thud that shook the glass. Hear him speak directly heartbreaking words that somehow captured how devastating the blast was.
It looks like an apocalypse. We were in the store and the first explosion happened. Nothing happened to us. We were quite fine. And then the second explosion was insanely strong.
Across the city, cameras kept rolling. In one video, a woman filming the smoke gasps as the shockwave tears through her apartment. Windows shatter, walls crumble. She screams for her children. In another, a bride posing for her wedding video on a nearby street is suddenly knocked to the ground as dust and debris swirl through the air. She later said, "I thought we were being bombed. I thought we were going to die." The explosion had come from Warehouse 12, a large hangar at the port that, for more than 6 years, had held over 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate, the same chemical used in industrial fertilizers and explosives. Officials had known about it for years. Port authorities had written letters, warning that the material was dangerous and needed to be moved. But nothing happened. "We told them it was a disaster waiting to happen," said a former port worker who later spoke to The Guardian. For years, no one listened. As the white smoke billowed higher, video footage showed a series of small flashes. Witnesses said it looked like fireworks going off inside the warehouse. Moments later, there was silence, followed by a blast, so powerful it was felt more than 200 kilometers away. Buildings across Beirut collapsed. Cars flipped in the streets. The city's hospitals were overwhelmed within minutes. A local journalist, filming live, shouted into his camera, "Beirut this morning is similar to a war zone."
On their homes, everything is almost destroyed. After the big explosion, an unseen explosion occurred yesterday.
Streets were filled with shattered glass, twisted metal, and dazed residents wandering through clouds of dust. He said more than 100 people were already confirmed dead, and thousands were injured. Many people were displaced, he said. They went to stay with relatives, friends, or hotels. They came back this morning to clean. The human toll was staggering. In the Jemizeh and Mar Mikhail neighborhoods, families searched through the remains of their homes. One man, standing amid the rubble, called out the name of his sister again and again, hoping for a response. Firefighters worked tirelessly, but several of them, including an entire rescue team, were never found. They had rushed toward the fire moments before the second explosion. Omar, the shopkeeper, tried to help those trapped nearby. "We went down the street," he said. "You would see people covered in blood, screaming. A woman was standing over there, and there was blood coming out of her neck. It was chaos." He paused for a long time before adding, "It looked like the end of the world." Emergency sirens echoed through the night as rescue teams from across Lebanon and neighboring countries arrived. The port itself had been reduced to a crater more than 140 meters wide. Entire silos were torn apart. Ships docked nearby were ripped from their moorings. Satellite images taken the next day showed a gaping hole where the warehouse once stood. The blast left more than 300,000 people temporarily homeless. Windows were blown out across half the city. Hospitals, already strained by the COVID-19 pandemic, ran out of beds and supplies. Doctors treated patients in parking lots and hallways. Volunteers and nurses described carrying the injured in their arms, trying to stop bleeding with makeshift bandages. A young woman named Rima, who lived less than 2 kilometers away, recalled waking up in her kitchen surrounded by broken glass. "I thought an earthquake hit us," she said. "The windows shattered on me. I was covered in dust and smoke. I could not see anything." Her husband's voice came from another room, calling her name. She remembers crawling toward the sound. "Everything was destroyed," she said softly. "Our home, our street, everything." Investigators soon confirmed what had caused the explosion. ammonium nitrate, improperly stored since 2014. Over the years, customs officials had repeatedly requested its removal or sale, but the paperwork stalled in bureaucratic disputes. The chemicals sat inside the warehouse, just meters from the city's grain silos, alongside fireworks and other flammable materials. When the fire broke out that evening, it triggered a chain reaction. Video footage from the port that day shows small white sparks, the fireworks igniting, followed by a massive orange fireball that consumed the screen. For many who filmed it, the last thing their cameras captured was the shockwave racing toward them. In the days after, Beirut's residents gathered at the port site to demand answers. Families of victims held up pictures of their loved ones. Who kept it there? One father shouted. Who ignored the warnings? The government launched an investigation, but frustration quickly grew as officials blamed one another. The prime minister at the time resigned within a week, saying the explosion was a result of chronic corruption. Among the debris, rescue crews continued to search for missing people. International teams from France, Russia, and other nations joined the effort. At one point, the faint sound of a heartbeat detected under rubble gave hope that someone might still be alive, though the signal later faded. Each discovery of a victim's body brought tears, anger, and exhaustion. As the days turned to weeks, Beirut began to clean up. Streets were swept, windows were replaced, murals appeared on shattered walls, painted by volunteers to honor the lives lost. The silos at the port, scarred and leaning, became a silent memorial. One local man said, "We do not need monuments. The silos are a reminder." They watched everything. By the time the investigation concluded months later, the world learned that warnings about the ammonium nitrate had been ignored for nearly 7 years. The material had arrived on a Russian cargo ship and was impounded after legal and financial disputes. It had been left there ever since. The explosion destroyed a large part of Beirut, killed more than 200 people, injured over 7,000, and caused billions of dollars in damage. To this day, survivors like Omar still find it hard to speak about what happened. "Every loud sound makes us jump," he said quietly. "Every vibration brings that night back." His words echo through the broken port, a place where an entire city was forever changed in just a few seconds. Shortly before 1 o'clock in the morning, emergency lines began ringing. A fire had broken out in Grenfell Tower, a 24-story residential block in North Kensington, West London. The London Fire Brigade received the first call at 12:54 a.m. Crews were on scene within 6 minutes, but by then, smoke and flames were already spreading up the outside of the building. Witnesses standing in the nearby streets watched in disbelief as the blaze climbed rapidly from one floor to the next. "Look, there's a family there. There's a family, there's a kid with his head out," one man said as he filmed the burning tower. Another voice cried, "We saw people looking out the window screaming, 'Help,' flashing their lights and everything, and now all those windows, people are gone." Inside the building, hundreds of residents were trapped. Eddie Daffarn, who lived on the 16th floor, recalled, "A neighbor from downstairs found me and said, 'Look, you need to get out of the building.' I went into the bathroom, wrapped a wet towel around my face, and ran out of the door." Others tried to escape by tying sheets together to make ropes, but the makeshift lines did not reach the ground. "I saw people jumping out of windows, throwing their children out, turning lights on to grab people's attention. It was horrible," one witness said. On the top floors, residents waved flashlights and used mobile phones to signal for help. People were screaming, people shouting, using their phones trying to tell us they were there, another resident explained. "But I think by then, it was too late for anyone to help them. Whoever told them to stay in the building, that was wrong." Grenfell Tower contained about 120 flats, home to an estimated 400 to 600 people. The fire spread with terrifying speed, overwhelming even the most experienced firefighters. London Fire Commissioner Danny Cotton said this later. By sunrise, flames were visible across the city skyline.
An unprecedented incident. In my 29 years of being a firefighter, I have never ever seen anything of this scale.
On the ground, children rescued from the tower were given oxygen as paramedics worked through the night. Emergency services took the injured to 6 hospitals across London. By the end of that day, 78 people had been treated. 34 remained in hospital. and more than a dozen were in critical condition. Dozens were still missing. Residents and witnesses quickly began to question how the fire had spread so fast. The tower had been refurbished the previous year, with new exterior cladding and insulation. I saw the fire coming up really fast because of the cladding, one survivor said. The cladding was flammable, and it just caught up like a matchstick. By 7 o'clock in the morning, the high-rise was still burning uncontrollably. Local residents and volunteers gathered at nearby community centers to provide food, clothing, and shelter. People left in their pajamas. They have nothing at all, one woman said as she unloaded donations of baby food, nappies, and clothes. At Latimer Community Church, locals organized supplies, distributing water, toothbrushes, and blankets. This is a very poor community, said Danny Donaldson, who helped coordinate the relief effort. But people are bringing what they can. While volunteers worked to help the survivors, many families searched for missing relatives. 12-year-old Jessica Urbano was among those unaccounted for. Francis, whose sister Zainab and 2-year-old nephew Jeremiah lived on the 14th floor, described their final call. I said to her, "You've got to go down the stairs now." She said, "I'm still up there." I told her, "Use the stairs. Don't worry about the smoke. Just come down." She tried, but at one point her son collapsed. Then the line went dead. Zainab and Jeremiah never made it out. Another woman said her family had been trapped in the lift. They were stuck because the fire exit was on fire, and they couldn't get out, she explained. Someone pulled the lift open and took them out, but my father-in-law hasn't been heard from. Many waited outside hospitals or rest centers through the night, holding photographs of loved ones. As daylight revealed the charred remains of the tower, public anger grew. Residents groups said they had warned the building's management months earlier about fire safety issues. A blog post by the Grenfell Action Group had stated in November 2016 that only a catastrophic event would expose the problems they had raised. Judith Blakeman, who represented tenants in the area for over 35 years, said, "Many residents felt their concerns were being tossed aside, treated as an overreaction. Now everyone's worst nightmare has happened. That's indefensible." Robert Black, chief executive of the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organization, which managed the building, was questioned on live television that night. When asked about the residents' warnings, he said, "We are in complete shock. I've been here since 3:30 this morning. We do listen to people, but at the moment there's an ongoing police and fire investigation. I cannot comment on those accusations." When pressed about the lack of sprinklers, he responded, "This isn't a new build. I can't comment on that at the moment. We'll take part in a full investigation to find out what happened." Experts pointed out that Grenfell Tower had no central fire alarm or sprinkler system, and only one stairway for escape. The stay put policy, which advised residents to remain in their flats during fires, came under scrutiny. One survivor said, "That's ridiculous. If a building's on fire and you're in the middle, there's no way you're going to be saved. There's no point in staying put." Former firefighter and Member of Parliament Jim Fitzpatrick told reporters, "This shouldn't be happening in 21st century London." By evening, makeshift memorials appeared near the site. Volunteers from across London arrived with food, blankets, and toys for children. A man from the local Sikh temple said, "When I woke up at 5 in the morning and saw the news, the first thing I thought was, they might need help." That night, authorities confirmed at least 12 people were dead, with many more missing. The death toll would later rise to 72. Questions about the building's design, materials, and management continued for years afterward. And that brings us to the end of this episode. If you found this video informative, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what we drop next. We cover stories like this almost every day, and trust me, you don't want to be left behind.